At some point after making some good progress with your pull-up negatives, it may be time to bridge the gap between pull-up negatives and the real thing. Now, before we get into the details here, I want to stress that the timing of when we get to this step is going to be entirely different for each individual. In fact, I'd wager that for most of you watching this video, it's way too early to start thinking about step 2 of our pull-up progression. But as I touched on in part 1, I can't know how far along each individual person is with their progression. For a handful of you, perhaps you are already on the verge of being able to do pull-ups in the context of a workout. And for those cases, I didn't want step 2 to be a mystery. But for the majority of trainees, especially those just starting out, this video is probably occurring on your calendar much too early. So if you're still working on 4 or 6 second negatives, don't sweat it. You're not behind or anything like that. Working through negatives can take a long time, but this video will always be available to you, so you can revisit it whenever the time is right. With that said, here's the best way to approach the next phase of our pull-up progression. Once you're able to handle some long negatives, like 15-second negatives, there's a pretty good chance that you've worked your way towards being able to do a pull-up or two. And if that's the case, congratulations. Even so, being able to get a handful of pull-ups may still leave you a bit short if your workout calls for multiple sets of 8 or 10 or 12. So what should we do? When you get to this stage, we're going to use a combination of pull-ups and pull-up negatives. What I find works the best is to begin each set with as many pull-ups as you can do on your own, and then complete a set of negatives immediately afterwards. For this stage, 6 or 8 second negatives will probably work the best, which is probably in the cards if you've already worked your way up to 15-second negatives. And as for how many, well, I like to cut the remaining number of pull-ups in the assigned set in half and use that as a target. So here's an example. Let's say your workout calls for sets of 10 pull-ups. You've worked your way up to being able to complete 3 full pull-ups on your own. So maybe you get 3 pull-ups to start, and that leaves you with 7 remaining out of our original set of 10. Cut that in half and do that many. In our case, we have 3.5, and you can either round up or down, it doesn't matter too much. Whatever you feel like you can do. So let's say you do 3 full pull-ups and then immediately move to a set of 4 negatives with a 6-second descent. One thing to be aware of is that this method of combining concentric failure with eccentric failure, that is maxing out how many you can pull and how many you can lower in quick succession, is bound to leave you feeling very taxed. So you'll probably find that you have to adjust from set to set. So in that first example, you got 3 pull-ups plus 4 negatives. The next set, you might get only 2 pull-ups and 3 negatives. Then after that, maybe only 1 tough pull-up and then 3 negatives. After that, maybe you just have to move back to just negatives, and that's totally fine. Totally to be expected. Just take careful notes so you can find little creases to improve with each workout. So far, so good. Now, once you're able to consistently average around 6 pull-ups, now you can ditch the negatives entirely. Even if your workout calls for, say, sets of 12. If you can get sets of 7, 6, 5, and 5, that's enough volume for you to make improvements over time without the need for complementary negatives. And that's the long road of our pull-up progression. You start with negatives, then add time to your negatives, then a combination of pull-ups and pull-up negatives, and finally onto a dose of just pull-ups. I want to stress again that this can take a long time, weeks, months, even longer. It really depends on a lot of things that frankly I can't really control in this context. But one thing to keep in mind if you've been chipping away at negatives for a long time is that even if you haven't moved on to doing pull-ups, you're definitely still getting stronger. And that's the point, right? The pull-up is just one of many, many tools that we have in our toolkit to help you get stronger and fitter. And the pull-up negative is one of those tools too. And while getting that first pull-up is a fantastic milestone, let's not lose sight of the big picture. We're here to improve, to get fitter, to be stronger. And as long as you're making progress, it's not worth losing sleep over which version of the tool you're using to get there. So hopefully this helps. Godspeed with those pull-ups.